University turned me into a secessionist. If studying political science in the nation's capital showed me anything, it definitely showed me the spirit behind ushering a population as large as America into the same future. The strategy for that would be long and overarching. It would mean allowing one rewarded class to receive privileges from a system while the oppressed classes watched. But this is important. You need the oppressed class kept out of the system so later they would fight to be a part of the system in the name of representation, in the name of equality, in the name of overcoming. The problem is neither class would understand that the system that hands out these rewards and privileges, it was designed to crush them both. This is how you get people of different backgrounds and different histories to build themselves into the same cage without realizing the invisible hand that's closing the cage door on them all. You have the oppressed class, which is the most important class of all in this scenario, because they become the soldiers you need to keep down until the moment you galvanize them to fight to have equal parts of bait. And they do not ever realize the bait is poison. I have every confidence this was how Americans were used as foot soldiers. No matter if you are white, black, or brown, the rewarded classes and oppressed classes were used for one agenda, just in different ways. Now they both stare a technocratic and authoritarian regime in the face. And that's no cap. There was a rewarded class that would fight for what they believed was their independence. They were bred to be patriotic. They were bred to fight for what they believed was a constitutional republic, but they would be fed lies about why their race was superior and given a fiat system that presented the illusion of wealth. You'd have an oppressed class that would have so much pride for their skin color and diaspora, their pride could be weaponized against them to the extent that they'd not realize that if they fight for an equal and equitable amount of what the rewarded classes had, both classes build themselves into the same cage. They never do see the invisible hand closing the cage door on them both. It sounds like an arc from a bad sci-fi movie, but it's real life now. The truth is crazier than any conspiracy theory. From what I've observed while studying amongst those with God complexes, political hopefuls, political strategists, Americans have no business being at war with one another. Absolutely no business. Agendas for the West are already pre-planned. The American voter does not seem to be in control in the way they think, which is why you can have a president with dementia on a presidential debate stage. So you can decide to grade this individual on a curve, or you can start to ask questions now. That's where Americans should start. Don't take my word for anything. Ask yourselves why it is that independent vehicles, Democratic vehicles, and Republican vehicles set off in 3 different directions for different futures, but they end up in the same place at the same time, staring the same regime in the face. That wouldn't happen if agendas were not already pre-planned. Which is why I can make the case for a national divorce or a national realignment of states. I can do it in my sleep, actually. America has skeletons. There is a tapestry, a backdrop of webbed lies you don't need to untangle, which is the good news. The bad news is that at the rate that deconstructionists are produced, at the rate borders are flooded to change the census to impact the Electoral College, the reality that every single demographic was an instrument to an overarching agenda they don't understand and can't fathom. It would seem like the only path forward Americans have is to unite, to divide. That's how you thwart the agendas you walked blindly into. And if that's the dumbest thing you've ever heard, if that's a concept that's denied in the 21st century, Americans will see the value in building parallel systems to what's here, like life depends on it. You will beg secessionists for secessionist models. And that's not to fearmonger. That is to suggest that this may be the end game for America. And there are no Avengers coming to save us. Sentiments overflow when it comes to national divorce. I understand secessionist thinking, and I understand the criticisms it comes with as well. I do believe more than two things can be true at once. I understand that if you've already weighed the consequences of remaining in a union with people who politically persecute and imprison their political opponents, you sense that whether you rise to the occasion of severing the jurisdiction of tyrants or not, you're still looking at a world of pain. Americans resent the idea of national divorce on the grounds that it will cause a civil war, yet the alternative is what? Remaining in a union with Marxists, socialists, communists, and deconstructionists who persecute, abuse, and imprison their political opposition? Americans can't fathom what their union will look like if states were to withdraw from the current union. So they'll remain in the one they're in. That's guaranteed to look different when America becomes something unrecognizable. Americans dare their government to impede on their Second Amendment, yet shrink when secession is mentioned out of fear that their government would retaliate. Here's the thing about all of this. It's ironic. It's ironic that these postures leave secessionists with nothing left to defend. I mean, the very things Americans are trying to avoid are guaranteed anyway. That's what makes our circumstances as a country so dire and unique. To that point, nobody in their right mind wakes up with secessionist platitudes. That doesn't happen. You don't wake up like this. You arrive here after asking yourself if the consequences of a national divorce are worse than the future ahead, where you see something that's wearing the costume of democracy, but it has a very authoritarian and technocratic nature. Unless you can defend why remaining in a union with those who will imprison or persecute you for trying to leave a union is safer than any alternative, yeah. Secessionists need defending no more than a lion needs defending. In 2024 and beyond, those are facts. I do believe the truth is operating in plain sight when it comes to America, which is why it's so easy to overlook the truth. It's in plain sight. I think at the heart and at the meat of everything we're dealing with, the facts are that in 2024, everything we've survived and experienced as a country, it can really be boiled down to the fact that we're now asking for two different constitutions that exercise different restraints. We are asking for different futures, which does beg the question. Do you throw healing platitudes at that? Can you unite your way out of that challenge? Or do you view the American experiment as concluded? Do you accept that Americans have the beauty and the horror of unhitching their wagons from provinces and geographies that consent to what's on the horizon? These are questions that deserve answers. On the back of those answers, we may come to an agreement that maybe it should be we the people versus the union. It's not the country that needs to split apart. It's the union that must dissolve in the 21st century. So what has attributed to the fact that Americans just don't realize that it's their union that has expired? They're not diagnosing themselves. I do suspect that it has something to do with social engineering and mass psychological operations. I think those things are happening within each and every political faction. And that's easy to challenge if true or not. You can take conservatives as the first example. Conservatives who've been told all their lives to conserve while quoting their indivisible have abandoned the formula of conservation. Conservation's formula is not integrationism. It can't be remaining to be indivisible, not if you have an expired union. It must be a separatist vehicle in the 21st century. It has to be, or else you get a recessive result, or else you conserve nothing. Across the political aisle, you have modern liberals and progressives who are equally as fascinating in this hour. You can take a percentage of those factions who hate their skin color for the crimes other generations have committed. And then there are other members of the same factions that have learned to use the fact that since slaves were barred from amassing generational wealth, they should accept socialism, where no one will amass generational wealth. That's a recessive result. The fact that slaves could not own property is echoed to substantiate communism, where no one will own property. That is a recessive result. What's fascinating about these examples, out of objective observation, is that every single political faction works against their own interests, as they're also forwarding one agenda. That's not natural. In fact, it's mathematically impossible as far as coincidences go. We are witnessing a phenomenon where the same classes that say America is racist and irredeemable will also grow the same racist and irredeemable government. They repeat that since America was stolen, the answer isn't handing her back to her rightful owners. Oh no, it's to hand her over to globalists who have plans for the Western Hemisphere. So we're looking at groups that have accepted that since the colonizer comes in the name of letting no one keep their land, the answer is accepting the globalist, who comes in the name of letting no one keep their hemisphere. To my eyes, this is the same monster. Maybe one has a bigger hammer, but clearly one comes in the name of finishing what the other started. In these scenarios, what's fascinating is that the resolutions for the offenses are not only worse than the offenses, they forward one agenda. Always one agenda. So how do you correct course? How do you do that when you're a social body that can't untangle a tapestry of infinite tangles? You can't undo mass indoctrination. It's impossible. You'd have to have the power to change the literal cognitive orientations of people. America has fallen for propaganda. We've lost the first form of government, which is the nuclear family. We don't know men from women, left from right, up from down. We spin in civil unrest. Believe it or not, that means society needs a restart, which is one element of what a national divorce or a national realignment of states would be in the interest of. A national divorce isn't in the name of making everyone the same or attacking government. Government has a right to stand. A national divorce must be in the name of getting America back to a place where we can disagree on how life, liberty, and happiness can be attained. Because right now we've deviated so far that we aren't disagreeing on those things anymore. We're disagreeing on whether or not the government has the right to define those things for us. And that's the truth. We're debating on where the government's natural station should be. We're debating if the government should derive its powers from the people or should it preside over the people. And that's what makes the difference today. And that's why I stand on the business that America needs a diagnosis. And the diagnosis is clear as rain. America has an expired union problem. And the symptoms are front and present. Americans aren't enemies. We have an expired union. It's a hot take, but the answer to America's problems can't be draining a swamp. Draining a swamp would mean exposing that what's beneath the swamp is corroded beyond repair, and we knew that already. Americans should begin asking themselves, why shouldn't those who consent to the swamp, who grow the swamp, have the swamp? At this hour, after all the traps Americans have walked blindly into, after the grand exposure that agendas are pre-planned, Americans have no business fighting for the steering wheel of a country when they want two different futures. While it's true that there may be traitors in government, it's also true that millions of Americans consent to the promises those traitors have offered them. So here's what that points to. It's an unsavory reality, but America has a disease. Her disease is an expired union. So her symptoms, they're clear. We've lost consensus on what the Constitution should restrain. We don't have consensus on where the government's natural station should be. A social organism that loses those two things can't say they haven't outgrown their union. They have. You don't have a union unless you have those foundational pillars. So what determines those foundational pillars? I believe it's the most important binary in American politics. Freedom orientation. And most Americans have never heard of it. The foundational case for a national divorce should be built upon freedom orientation.